What's up, guys? Welcome to a brand new episode of the Fit Women's Weekly podcast. I am so excited because today I'm joined by Dr. Henry Mahncke, who's going to talk to us about brain health and keeping our brain as strong and as sharp as possible. I talk about all the time about keeping our body strong, maintaining our muscle mass, building muscle mass as we get older, but what about our brain? What should we actually be doing to keep it as sharp as possible and as healthy as possible? Are there certain things with our diet we should be doing? Are there certain types of games that we should be doing? Are there certain types of exercises in terms of running or table tennis? Crossword puzzles, are those actually as beneficial as we think? I don't know. We're going to break it all down in this episode. It is filled with so many nuggets, and I hope that you guys enjoy this. If you do me a favor, make sure to like this video and make sure to subscribe. Or if you're listening to this on the podcast platform, make sure that you're subscribed and leave a review. It really does mean a lot to me, and it helps get this podcast out to other women who want to live a healthier life and, of course, live their fitness. And then the last thing that I'm going to say, I'm not going to go into a ton of detail because I want to jump into this episode, is that our Ignite 30 challenge begins on November 4th. It is not too late to sign up. I'll make sure to put everything down in the show notes. But basically, if you are looking to stay consistent with your workout routine, what you're doing right now isn't working and you need something else to push you a little bit harder, to let you know what you need to do on a day-to-day basis to push your body into a state where it goes, ooh, I need to get stronger. I need to rev up my metabolism a little bit. Well, then the Ignite 30 is probably exactly what you need. It is a simple plan to follow, only 20 to 60 minutes a day. You get to choose. There's a busy woman's goal and then like your quote unquote primary goal for each and every day. And so I'm going to make sure that you have a program that is not overwhelming, that you can maintain your fitness, especially over this time of year. Also, nutrition challenges are included. I get that question a lot. So go check it out and sign up so that you can join me on November 4th to kick things off. All right, let's jump into this episode. Dr. Mahncke, it is a pleasure to have you on the show today. I would just love to understand a little bit more of what it is that you do specifically and learn a little bit more about Brain HQ. I've kind of been trying to research a little bit and I'm like, this sounds very, very interesting to me. I know that as a personal trainer, I focus so much on the body, right? Bones and muscles and keeping our heart healthy, but I don't get to work as much with the brain. So please introduce yourself and tell me what it is exactly that you do.
Sure. Well, the most important thing to say is, hey, the brain is a part of the body. So if we're thinking about keeping our bodies fit, we should certainly be keeping our brains fit as well. So my background is, hey, I'm a neuroscientist. I originally came out to San Francisco to get a graduate degree in neuroscience. I got a PhD in neuroscience from the University of California, San Francisco. And I had the opportunity to just work in a fabulous lab run by a researcher named Dr. Michael Merznick. And what Mike is really world famous for, at least in the world of neuroscientists, my parents always remind me that that doesn't mean you're actually world famous. He's known for his discovery that the adult brain is capable of change and rewiring itself. And, if you're a fitness person, you probably already think, well, of course, the body's capable of change, right? We can go from being very out of shape to very in shape and all points in between. But it's only recently become clear that the brain works exactly the same way. And in fact, if you were to roll back the clock to the early 1970s and you were to ask any brain scientist, how does the brain work? They all would have said the same thing, right? They all would have said, hey, the brain's a computer chip. It's got wires, processes information, carries electricity, sounds exactly like a computer chip. And that led to some really wrong ideas about brain health and brain fitness, right? Because it led to the idea that, well, the brain probably just wears out as it gets older, right? We all know that our computers eventually stop working. It's time to get
batteries, right?
Exactly. And it led to the idea, in fact, if you read papers from the 1970s, you'll read about the wear and tear hypothesis of aging, right? Our brain just wears out. And that made us think, hey, eventually we slow down and we get worse memory and we get Alzheimer's disease, and that's that. Mm-hmm. And it also led to the idea that the brain can't be fixed if it's broken, right? And you drop a computer on the floor and it breaks, like you're getting a new computer, right? You're not fixing it. And so people had, I think, very much much the idea that if you had a stroke or you had traumatic brain injury, that you really weren't going to recover from that. And the research around brain change that Dr. Merznick led really just turned the world on its head. We went from a world where we thought the brain was just kind of hardwired. Maybe once you were after a little kid, your brain, you just had the brain you had. You were never going to change it. We went from that world to a world that's more accurate biologically, to a world where hey, we understand the brain is constantly changing and rewiring itself in response to what we do with it. And hey, it happens when we're little kids. It happens when we're young adults. Happens when we're old adults. It happens if we have healthy brains. It happens if we have unhealthy brains.
And
It
it's
is
kind
just
of
how
been
the
new as
brain
well
works.
too that really I feel like it's more recent that we've really just learned that the brain isn't done maturing now until our later 20s, right?
That is absolutely true structurally,
Mhm.
in the sense that, right, if you look with brain imaging, like magnetic resonance imaging, you can
Mhm.
see that the white matter, which is the insulation that kind of wraps the connections between neurons, that isn't really fully into place on the average until the mid 20s, which probably explains a lot of things about young people and risk taking, because the frontal
Right.
cortex of the brain, where all that wiring is happening, is where sort of the seat of good decision making happens. But to push that even one step further, even once that structural wiring and insulation is in place, the brain, I would say, actually is never stopped developing. We are going to continue to rewire our brain through learning and experience and change, and that's going to happen in our 20s, but it's going to happen in our 40s and our 60s and our 80s, and for those of us who are lucky enough to make it, into our hundreds. And that's a really powerful idea, right? I meet people all the time and they say, well, I'm just not good at languages. I can never learn French. I talk to people, I've never been a math person, right?
Right.
And hey, I get that. We all have different experiences in our childhood that, form these images of ourselves. But that's a very crystallized notion of your brain and how it works.
Or
Whereas
you
in
can't teach an
reality,
old dog new tricks.
that is exactly right. And when I hear that, what I usually come back and tell people is, hey, what brain plasticity tells us is, hey, what makes a dog old is it stops learning new tricks.
Right.
And so if you can keep your brain learning through something you enjoy, through the activities you have, you're going to keep a young brain that's capable of change. And in fact, that it's a healthy brain. So, this has just been a revolution in how we think about brain health over the past 30 years. And what we're now starting to do is put it into action. So, as a fitness leader, you're probably familiar with the idea that, hey, we actually now understand that certain aspects of physical exercise are linked to brain health. And
Absolutely.
it's not obvious that that would be true, right? Why would exercising your muscles help your brain? But it clearly does, and we can talk more about that. And then, to sort of loop back to my very long self-introduction, what we're doing at Brain HQ is we're taking that idea and we're building real-world brain training exercises that really anyone can do on their computer or their phone. And they take advantage of this idea of brain plasticity. They're adaptive, challenging exercises that focus on speed and attention and working memory. And they rewire the brain. We've seen that with brain imaging experiments. And as a result, they build a healthier brain and help people think faster, focus better, and remember more. But it's really just opened up this huge vista to starting to think about how should we take care of our brains throughout our entire lives, right? For the moment we're born as a baby to the moment we pass away. How can we maintain, optimize brain health in exactly the same way that we should be maintaining and optimizing our physical health so we have a great, vibrant life and we can do all the things we want to do?
Do you feel like our modern world with modern technology has really hurt people a lot when it comes to brain health because we're no longer, thanks to Google. Like my husband and I have a game that if we ever have a question that we know we have the answer to, it's somewhere in there. We don't let each other just pick up our phone and look it up because we're like, it's in that file, it's in our filing cabinet somewhere. Give yourself at least 5 or 10 minutes and see if you can find it. Because otherwise, if you're always just finding the answer because it's so easy on our computers or on our phone, we're not making our brains work like they used to have to work.
Yeah, I certainly think we're living in a very different technological environment, and the pace of technology change has gotten so fast that, its impact on our brains is already distinct than it was from, let's say, our parents or even a
Mhm.
younger generation. I'm a bit of a moderate on that. I normally don't like to say, hey, it's good or it's bad
Mhm.
exactly. I'm more a believer that, hey, it's different. And we should probably think very carefully about what those differences mean.
Mhm.
You know, you gave a great example. An example that often comes to me is GPS, right? So I live in San Francisco. I've lived here for, I guess, almost 30 years now. And, I lived here before GPS and I've lived here after GPS. And it is, I think, striking that we all use, Google Maps or Apple Maps when we're driving, even in a city that we've lived in for a long time. And on the one hand, sometimes I'll plot out that route and I'll be like, oh, I had no idea you could get from here to there that way.
Mhm.
And other times I wonder exactly like you saying, hey, am I exercising the parts of my brain that are involved in navigation and planning and thinking less because, I just pop in the destination and I never get to experience that. And, I think that is an important change for brain health. It's quite surprising that it turns out that the part of the brain that's involved in navigation, like through a city, is actually the part of the brain that's involved in forming memories. It's called the hippocampus.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of sort of deep-seated, almost philosophical thinking among neuroscientists. Hey, why is making a long-term memory kind of the same to the brain as finding your way through the city? But it definitely is. We know
It
that
makes
for
perfect
sure.
sense. I mean, it's a memory in there of how to get to point A to
I
point
suppose
B.
so, and it's kind of the learning and the point B. But there was this wonderful study done in London taxi cab drivers, probably 20 years ago now. And as you may know, to get a taxi cab license in London, at least back in the day, you had to demonstrate that you could, get all the way across London in all different ways. And London, it's an incredibly big city. It's an incredibly ancient city. It's not like Manhattan where we have vertical and horizontal streets.
Right.
And so taxi cab drivers had to demonstrate, they called it the knowledge, right? And so some scientists in the UK did an experiment and they actually looked at this part of the brain, the hippocampus, of people who had the knowledge and ordinary people, and then maybe taxi cab drivers at the beginning of their career. And they clearly showed that actually the hippocampus got bigger and it got thicker as a result of acquiring this navigational knowledge. Now, if that's true, and it clearly is, you have to wonder, well, if we no longer have to acquire this navigational knowledge, maybe our hippocampus is not going to be so big and strong and healthy.
Mhm.
And hey, the hippocampus is the first thing that starts to deteriorate as we go on to Alzheimer's disease and certain kinds of dementia. So maybe we are, as you say, kind of putting our brain health a little bit at risk with these kinds of things. So I do think that what you say is exactly right. I think all of us should be looking for moments that we can exercise our brains, put our brains to use, and make, in that sense, contribute to their health. Exactly the same way in fitness, right? I mean, I imagine you might tell someone, hey, if you're going somewhere on the second floor, or if you're always in the habit of taking the elevator because it's right there in front of you, hey, maybe think about taking the stairs, right? It's not a life-changing thing, but each little bit of extra exercise you can get in is going to help your fitness. It's going to help preserve your mobility. And I think absolutely the same thing is through cognition, right?
Mhm.
So like you say, you're trying to remember who was that actor in that movie for 5 years
Exactly.
ago. Worth giving yourself a chance to think it through, puzzle through. Well, they were also in this other movie and they were friend of person rather than just answering it right off the bat. That little bit of extra cognitive exercise is kind of like taking the stairs in extra flight and giving yourself some
Exactly.
physical exercise.
Also, my trick for figuring that kind of stuff out is I'll go through the alphabet. Like, who is that actor? Did it start with an A, B, C? Okay, I know it started with a C. What was it? CH? And then a lot of times it'll pop into my head. I'm curious, and maybe the people listening are curious as well. Is there any kind of science that shows that there's some kind of capacity to our memory bank, so to speak? So, like, we have a limited amount of memories that we can keep, and once we hit that, we kind of start losing memories at the bottom.
Yeah, there's this works in different ways for different kinds of memory. So there are some examples with limitations, but I think mostly the answer is actually no.
Mhm.
So some common areas where we know there are limitations is like what's called working memory. So working memory is your ability to keep a number of things in mind at the same time and kind of juggle them back and forth. The
Mhm.
classic example is a phone number, right? Can I remember all the digits? You tell me your phone number and can I remember all the digits by the time I actually open up my phone and type it in with
Right.
my thumbs? Right. And hey, there's a ton of very famous experiments that say, hey, for just about everyone, the magic number of items you can keep in your working memory is seven plus or minus two, as they
Mhm.
say. If you have low working memory, maybe five. If you have great working memory, maybe nine. But hey, most people just cannot keep 15 items in their working
Mhm.
memory. And that probably has to do with some, very fascinating and complex issues about how brain waves work and how networks of neurons kind of fire together to maintain an image of something in your mind. So in that sense, that's a well-known limitation. Another pretty well-known limitation is, people come to me all the time and they're like, "Oh, I'm terrible at names and faces, right? I just cannot remember people's names." And I usually say, "Hey, you are fine,
Right.
actually, right?"
You've convinced it, that's mindset a lot of times too.
It's mindset, but it's also, back to your comments about the modern world.
Mhm.
We as humans, we were evolved to live in these, sort of small hunter-gatherer societies, probably around 100 people in them, is what
Mhm.
anthropologists say. And hey, most people can remember 100 names and faces of people that we know and have worked with, your childhood friends, your family members, the people you see every day at work. So that's what your brain was evolved to do. It's fine at it. What your brain was not evolved to do is how we've moved into this kind of more modern society with cities and industrial living. And now our expectation is I meet someone once at a, coffee store, and 4 months later I see them again and I should be able to remember their name. And like, no, actually you shouldn't.
Don't
Your
feel
brain was never
bad.
evolved to do that. You're never going to do that. Don't feel bad about it. We should all just feel fine about reintroducing ourselves. And, there's tips and tricks, but the brain just wasn't evolved to do that. On the other hand, I think that a lot of people have a metaphor of their brain that it's like their computer's hard disk, right?
Mhm.
Hey, I've got 100 gigabytes on my hard disk, and once I fill it all up with photos, I gotta, like you said, I gotta delete the old ones, and they gotta
Mhm.
go. And there's not really a lot of evidence that our brain works that way.
Mhm.
It is not so much that as we live a longer life that we get rid of our younger memories, and
Mhm.
that's why we can't remember them. I don't think there's many neuroscientists see it that way. I do think it's true that we often think of memory with a metaphor that's probably just wrong, right? Well, I mean, let's say you're trying to remember something from your childhood, right? The metaphor that a person might have is, well, my brain's kind of like a filing cabinet, right? I'll pull open the filing cabinet drawer, flick through it. Oh, if there's that one, I'll pull it out. Oh, there's me at camp with my best friend. That's not really the way memory works. When you remember something in your brain actually fully recreates the experience for you. And what I mean by that is if you look at brain imaging and you ask people to, see something, and then you ask them to close their eyes and imagine seeing it, there's like a lot of overlap between
Right.
those situations, right? That is the memory. It is recreating the experience as it happened to you in your brain. And what that means is remembering is a very active process, right? We're not just pulling something out of the filing cabinet, we're turning on hundreds of different areas of the brain that are connected to each other in all these complex ways. So because it is an active process. It's a process that can and needs to be exercised, right? Again, from a physical fitness perspective, let's say you got really good at doing pull-ups 20 years ago, right? Good for you.
Hey,
You
I
didn't do any
knocked out
pull-ups.
30 today, actually.
That is incredible. Wow. I will get some tips from you on that topic.
Happy to
Uh,
pull-ups are my thing.
Okay, but then if you didn't do them for 20 years, you wouldn't say, "Well, I'll just hop on and rack out 30 pull-ups again,"
Right.
right? Because your body wouldn't be accustomed to anything. So if you are looking to have those childhood memories stay fresh, you need to actively exercise recreating them. You need to take little bits of your day and you need to think, I really want to walk through my childhood camp experience where I met my best friend. And you need to actively bring those memories to life. What did I hear? What did I see? What was I feeling? What was I thinking? What did I smell? And that process itself can strengthen memories. But in that sense, no, I don't think we get full in that sense. Sometimes a science fiction book will come out, right? What if we all lived to be 200? What would that be like? I mean, probably bad in a lot of ways, but I don't think one of them would be you would run out of memories.
Right.
This doesn't seem to be how it works.
That's interesting that you said that about remembering your memories to help you keep your memories. And again, talking about modern society, I grew up in the time, I'm what's called an Oregon Trail millennial, where I was, the old school. I had real photos back in the day. I remember a time before the internet. And, we have the photo books still that we are able to look back at. I was actually just showing my sister-in-law a couple weekends ago my scrapbooks from college. And
Okay.
a lot of the kids nowadays, they don't have that, right? Because everything's saved in our phone. And I don't think that families sit down and, oh, let's scroll through our phone from when you were in kindergarten. So I wonder how that will change in the future as well with people being able to keep their memories healthy.
I think you're exactly right. I think that, very heartwarming sense of, hey, let's sit around and let's get out the wedding photos, or let's
Right.
look at the photo book I had from when you were in elementary school. That's a process by which we exercise our memories that strengthens the memories we already have. And to the extent we don't do them, I think they're more likely to fade. I think more families probably should bust out the iPhone and take a look at those old photos. In fact, I think at this point, my favorite thing my phone does is it occasionally says, "Hey, want to know what you were doing 10 years ago? Look at you
Right.
climbing this mountain." I'm like, "Oh, that's a great memory." I'm
That's
glad you're
awesome.
refreshing that, and that helps it cement it. But again, it just shows that the brain and memory and thinking and all this stuff is a very active process. It's not a passive system. It's not like a computer that does the same thing over and over again. This brain as a system is constantly rebuilding and rewiring itself in response to what we do, what we learn, and it reshapes itself in that way. And that process of brain plasticity, just like the physical body reshapes itself in response to what we ask it to do, can either build a healthier brain for us that can remember these things and have sharp, vivid perceptions and clear thinking, or it can build a brain that like doesn't do those things quite as well. And we start to slide into various kinds of cognitive impairment issues or brain health issues.
I definitely want to talk here in just a second about some tips on what you can actually do to improve your brain health, improve your brain fitness as you move forward with activities and nutrition. But I'm also, have, I was just thinking about this as we're talking about memories. Sometimes in your childhood, you kind of look back and you're like, wait, did this happen? Or was this a story that my mom told me? So what's going on in our brain where we confuse, the story of somebody else? And we've literally, like you've mentioned with memories, create this picture. And all of a sudden we've created that to be a memory that we had.
Yeah, you wouldn't think we would ever have false memories. If the brain worked like a file drawer and you had a file drawer full of things that happened to me and you had a file drawer full of things that my mom told me, you'd never get mixed up, right? There's two different
Right.
file drawers. But unfortunately, for better or worse, that brain doesn't work anything like that. When you first have the experience, as we were saying, all kinds of brain parts activate your sight, your sense, your sound, your smell, your thinking, and all those kinds of parts of the brain, they kind of fire together and they wire together and they form this coherent, multi-dimensional, multispectral kind of activity pattern. And hey, that goes away. And then when we want to remember it, we can trigger it, right? A smell can remind us of a memory, like Proust, right, in the Madeleine, and he remembers all of his childhood in France. And so you might think of that as that little bit of a sensation kind of kicks off this reverberation in the brain, which recruits all these other brain regions that were active when we were having that memory. And hey, we have the memory again. That's great. But what happens when your mom tells you something? Let's take a good scenario. You've forgotten a memory, right? And your mom tells you, "Oh, don't you remember when you were a kid? We used to go out to the market and we used to buy these, bananas." So as she's telling you that, well, your brain is forming that image. It doesn't really matter whether it happened or not, right? You're hearing it and your brain is thinking about being in the market and buying bananas, as the case may be. And if that happens enough, well, your brain will trigger that as if it happened. And, if you're an adult and you're very thoughtful, you might think, well, I form a conscious memory of not remembering that, even though my mom telling. But it's very, very easy for that to become a thing that your brain can kick off that at that point feels exactly like a memory you might have yourself. And, I think in most cases that's really quite benign, right? I think it's nice when my mom tells me about something that I kind of remember and, maybe it fills in some details and now I have this joint memory with her. But of course, that can be much more, problematic in certain situations, right? Sometimes people are trying to deceive you, right? And you can inadvertently form a false memory. There are terrible situations with like forced confessions, right? And I think often a person who's not under stress, who's cognitively healthy, thinks, why would someone ever confess to something they didn't do, right? It just you almost can't imagine that. But if your brain is under sufficient stress and you are being told over and over again that this thing happened and you did it, you're forming that image and that sensation in your mind. And if your stress is high enough and your panic is high enough, it can eventually seem like, well, that does actually kind of seem like a memory. How would I tell the difference? And so we can have very tragic outcomes for that. So memory is, it is an incredible thing that our brains can do, but it's not like a photo you pull out of the photo gallery, and that's exactly the way it was.
Right. Very, very interesting. So now as we're getting older, like I said, that Oregon Trail millennial, what can we be doing to help ourselves stay as healthy as we can up here? Because as my grandmother always used to say, anytime she'd have a lapse in memory, she'd be like, just a case of the old timers.
The old
And
time.
I don't want to have a case of the old timers if I can help it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think our generation as we get older, we are much more thinking about how we can take charge of our health and our destiny as we get older. I think my parents' generation and probably your parents too, maybe the last generation where it was like, well, this is what getting older is like, and I should
Yeah,
just sit back and like, what are you going to do,
this
right?
is part of it. Exactly.
Right now, the old timer.
I'm
So
supposed to
my
gain weight. I'm supposed to, lose.
supposed to lose mobility. I'm not going to be
Yep.
able to walk around anymore, and I'm probably not
Yep.
going to be able to remember things so good. But hey, this is the way our bodies were built, so we should just make the best of it.
Exactly.
So my grandfather passed away when I was about 10 years old, and he passed away of at the time what was called senile dementia, and we would now call that Alzheimer's disease. But when he passed away, it was like, hey, this is just kind of what happens. You're going to get old and lose your memory and be committed to a home. And I think our generation, we've had this change with our physical health, right? I think every person now who's getting older realizes, hey, I need to maintain physical activity. I should have a physical health program. I should walk. I should take the stairs when I can. I should swim. Maybe I'll do balance exercises to reduce my risk of fall. But fundamentally, we believe that we can change our physical fate by investing effort in our physical health, right?
Right.
And that's great. It is true. And people should absolutely do that. We should get to the point where we can do 32 pull-ups in the morning before we host the podcast. That's incredible. But I think we're just now at the point where we realize the same thing is true for brain health. And we do not have to accept that we're necessarily going to go on to dementia. We don't have to believe that it's all just in the genes, right? Your grandfather had dementia, so you are too, and whatever. It's going to hit you when it hits you. So there's quite a few things that we can do that have been shown to improve brain health, and I'll talk about a few of them. I'll start with physical health because, of course, you're talking about fitness, and many of the people watching or listening to this are thinking about fitness. It is very well established at this point that people who are in better physical health have reduced rates of cognitive decline and they have a lower risk of going on to Alzheimer's and dementia. And so why is that, right? It's counterintuitive, right? You're out there going up the stairs. That kind of feels like your leg muscles. Doesn't feel like you're working, right? And there seem to be probably two things that are going on. First of all, when you engage in physical exercise, it actually releases a growth factor in your brain called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And that's a protein that literally helps neurons sprout and helps them make new connections. And in that sense, builds the health of the brain. Why is that true? That's a great question. Probably has something to do with the fact that, again, back in old human times, as we were out and about in the world, our brains needed to learn and rewire themselves as we were getting exercise because we were out, hunting a mammoth or exploring a new part of the forest or whatever.
As I say, you're on trails or in the woods. You're not walking down a street. You have to be
Well,
very aware of
exactly
don't trip
right.
over this and die.
Exactly right. And as a brain scientist, as we talk about this kind of exercise, I think going to the gym is great. I went to the gym this morning myself. But, it's not like being out hiking on a trail, right? Being out hiking on a trail is much more cognitively demanding. There's more unexpected things, but on the plus side, there's more things to notice. You can use your attention and your working memory and your speed. The other thing that happens with physical exercise and brain health is, hey, we make our heart healthy. And making the heart healthy, we know has benefits like lowering blood pressure and reducing the risk of heart attack and stroke. And those are incredibly important for brain health. I mean, obviously, a stroke is a disastrous brain health issue, right? Literally, your brain is damaged because, it's deprived of oxygen for a period of time. But there are probably little tiny, sometimes we call them microstrokes. I hate to call them microstrokes because they sound so bad. But, from time to time, our brain is probably just getting a little touch of damage as a result of a heart health issue. And if you're exercising and building a healthier heart, hey, you're going to have less of those micro damages to your brain, and they'll add up less over time, and you'll be at less risk for dementia. So physical exercise is a great piece. A second area that's gotten a ton of interest that's been I'll mention a few of them and then I'll dive into just one or two depths. Often we think about physical exercise, we think about diet and nutrition, we think about stress, we think about sleep, we think about social connection, and then we think about my particular area of expertise, which is cognitive activity and brain training. So I'll pick one more and then I'll talk about brain training because it is so near and dear to my heart.
Perfect.
After physical exercise, I think one of the things that comes up most interestingly to people is, I think one of the most interesting ones is social connection. And, that's not one, again, that maybe 10 or 15 years ago a lot of people would have highlighted. But it's become very, very clear now that our brains are not designed to exist in isolation at all. We are social primates. We're designed to work together and be together, and play together, have fun
Makes
together,
a
be in love
tribe.
with each other. Exactly. Be angry at each other, as the case may be. And that actually ends up being incredibly important to our brains. The Surgeon General, wrote a book where he talked about loneliness is the new sedentary, is the new their risks from loneliness are as bad as your risk from being a sedentary person, right? And we do have an epidemic of loneliness, right? We are in our houses more, especially after the COVID pandemic. We have all kinds of things we can do around watching movies or, that don't involve necessarily being out and about with each other. We live farther from each other. I live 3,000 miles from my mom. I don't see her every day the way I would have a generation ago.
And it's also
And
so funny and kind of ironic that there's a loneliness epidemic, and yet we've never been so close to people in terms of like, I've got 5,000 almost followers on social media. There's people all around me, but yet I can be so lonely here in this home.
yes, and I thought, well, there's so much to say about social media, but some of it's a strength. I think it can bring us together. I think people probably watch the podcast and they feel some of that social connection that they're looking for, and that's great. But at the same time, so much of how we do live our lives does lead us to, not having so many authentic personal interactions. So anyway, people who are lonely are also actually quite a bit more likely to experience cognitive decline and go on to dementia. And it's a very active field of research to say, hey, can we build loneliness interventions? Which is like, is that a healthcare thing now? But the answer is yes, right? Can we build ways for people to join clubs or, get back to bowling with their friends or just go sit down and have a cup of coffee together with friends or strangers? And that's probably going to be an important way we think about brain health. And then the area that's nearest and dearest to my own heart is brain training or brain health or brain exercise. And so, what we've been doing, as I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, is taking this idea of rewiring the brain through activity and training and learning, and turning it into brain training exercises that people can do on their computer or on their phone. And the way we've been doing this, in the way that's I think most interesting and relevant these days, is quite a bit different. Often when people think about brain training, they think, well, gosh, my memory is not so great. Maybe I should try and remember some more things.
Like the
And
memory
that's
card game is what
yeah,
comes to my mind.
that's not really so good as it turns out. Your memory is so great, it's hard to just tell. If your memory is not great, it's hard to tell a person will just work on remembering things more.
Mhm.
So it turns out that the way we need to approach this is by actually making the brain faster and more accurate. And it turns out that underlying speed of processing is just fundamental to almost every cognitive ability. Speed contributes to your memory, and it contributes to your attention, and it contributes to your decision making. And the great news about thinking about speed and accuracy in the brain is, hey, it's very trainable. And so one way to think about what's happening to our brain as we get older is it's, it gets noisy. And, you and I might remember back when there were radios, right? And you would turn the
Yes.
dial. So you're an Oregon Trail kid,
Yep.
like,
Uh-huh. Oh yeah, you had to sit around and wait for the radio station to play your song and
yeah, that's right. And if you got a little off the signal, it would get kind of staticky and it would be hard to hear. And that's what happens on the age, frankly, starting when we're about 27, is the brain gets off the signal a little bit and starts to have an internal static or noise. And just like if you're listening to the radio, it's harder to hear and figure out what the song is if there's some static and noise on the radio. If you have that static or noise inside of your brain, well, it's harder to hear what the song on the radio is. Hard to hear what your partner is saying over dinner. Harder to remember when your spouse tells you 6 things you're supposed to get at the grocery store. And so, what the brain training exercises that we've been working on do is they take that static out. They make the brain faster and more accurate. And as a result, your brain kind of gets back on tune to kind of the main signal. Hey, that helps with sensation. It helps people hear better, helps people see better, but it also helps with memory and attention and thinking and decision making. And then it helps improve all kinds of real world skills like, real world speed and, your ability to continue to live independently in your own home or your driving safety. All of that is improved by helping the brain speed up and be more accurate and take out kind of that noise in that way. And then that's really been a revolution. There's actually more than 200 scientific papers that have now been published using Brain HQ training exercises. The field of brain training is quite a bit even bigger than that. It's not just us, but there's all kinds of people doing good work. And, the wheat has really started to separate from the chaff. I think as this notion of brain games got started, you can open your phone if you look for brain games. You will find a million, right? But none of them have really ever been through the kind of scientific trials that we'd sort of expect, right? If you tell someone walking 3 times a week is going to improve your memory and improve your cardiovascular fitness, you'd like to sort of see some clinical trials showing that's true, right? That seems
Yeah.
like a reasonable goal. Same thing is true with brain training, right? We want brain training trainings to go through rigorous clinical trials to show that they improve cognitive function and improve role function. And that's really happened with Brain HQ in particular over the past years. We really have accumulated a tremendous amount of scientific evidence that it works. And it ends up being different than crossword puzzles, right? For example, or you talked about the memory card game.
Or
If you think
Sudoku.
a Sudoku, right? Or I play Wordle, right? It's very fun.
Uh,
I enjoy it. I was one of the 1 million Americans who didn't get it right 2 days ago. So, but if we again look at memory and attention from that underlying basis, are we improving the speed by which the brain is accomplishing these fundamental operations? That's why crossword puzzles aren't really that helpful. Think about yourself doing a crossword puzzle. You're just kind of sitting there thinking, right?
right. You're
It
not in any rush.
not any rush. It kind of feels like the gears are turning. Sometimes it feels like the gears are stuck, but you're not really in any rush, exactly like you say. And as a result, you're probably not really strengthening your brain speed. You're probably not really changing brain health or brain plasticity in a significant way. And in fact, we and many of our research collaborators from around the country and around the world, we routinely use crossword puzzles or ordinary video games as a placebo control, right? That's something you can give half the people in a study that kind of seems like it should be helpful. But study after study shows that it's not. And in fact, there was a beautiful study about crossword puzzles led by a researcher at the University of Virginia a number of years ago. And what he did is he interviewed people all between the ages of 20 and 80, asked them kind of how many crossword puzzles they did per week, and then measured their cognitive function. And what you see is that at every age, people who do a lot of crossword puzzles, they do have better cognitive function. So that sounds promising. But then you look at the data and, hey, people who do a lot of crossword puzzles and people who do very few crossword puzzles, they're all kind of declining at the same rate. So what does that tell us? It tells us that crossword puzzles don't change the rate of cognitive decline, but you have to have good brain function to do crossword puzzles, right? You're not doing a crossword puzzle unless you have good working memory. The crossword puzzle isn't helping you build good working memory. And that's one of the challenges in this kind of field. But we've really kind of learned a lot. And I think we're at the point where we can think about brain fitness the way we think about physical fitness. We can make evidence-based recommendations to people about the kinds of things they should do to keep their brain healthy, like the things that I mentioned: physical exercise, sleep, stress reduction, social cognition, and diet, and then keeping their brains really active and challenged. And of course, we've been working on Brain HQ, a very specific brain training program, but there are lots of things people can do in their ordinary lives as well. So if you think about, hey, how can I get my brain faster, right? Well, one thing is, hey, learn a language. And that sounds like a heavy lift to a lot of people. There's a lot of wonderful language learning programs. There's a lot of wonderful classes you can take. But, you're going to exercise your attention, but you're going to exercise your speed, right? So, like you said, with a crossword puzzle, you just kind of have to sit there and think. But hey, if someone's going to talk to you in French, like your brain has to keep up, right?
Your brain's going to go back and forth. Yeah, exactly.
Right. It was speeded exercise, or take an activity. Maybe it's ping pong or pickleball or tennis, right? It's a physical activity, so that's good. But it's a great brain health activity because your brain has to be fast. You got to see where the ball is. You got to pay attention. You have to coordinate these complex, movements in space and time. In that sense, wonderful. You're outside, hopefully. Wonderful form of brain exercise as well. So when people ask me about, hey, what are real world things I can do, generally think of tasks like that really involve the speed, attention, and memory. And really learning, right? We're trying to drive brain plasticity. If you've been doing the same thing for 20 years, it doesn't matter that much what it is. It's probably not challenging your brain as much as it used to.
Is there a difference between, obviously we know reading is very good for you. Reading versus books on audio, for example. Is there any kind of correlation? Is one better than the other? And is there anything even associated with brain health?
I haven't seen a particular study on that, and I'm a pretty study-driven person. But I am of the belief that as long as you are paying careful attention to it one way or the other, then, hey, you are activating your brain in very similar ways. Reading is actually a weirdly new activity, right? Not too many people could read 500 years ago, right? It wasn't really until the invention of the printing press, right? 99% of people never read. And it's kind of wild from a brain imaging perspective. If you look at brain activation in kids as they're learning how to read,
Mhm.
reading just kidnaps part of the brain, right? There is a part of the brain that was doing something else. And then it's like, well, I guess we're learning to read now. It just kind of
Right.
takes over. So I think listening to stories is actually a very natural form of human interaction. And the only thing I would say about listening to, a book on your iPod or whatever is, hey, make sure you're paying attention to it,
Mhm.
right? If you're doing two things at once from a brain health perspective, you're probably doing zero things for your brain health, right? And
Right.
so if you're listening to the book and you're doing something else and, two chapters in, you're like, wait, who are these people? What are they doing? I don't think you've probably helped your brain health in that way.
I love that. It actually set me up for the next question I had written down. So my husband likes to try to tell me that he's can't multitask because he's a man, and that science shows that that's just not something that men are supposed to do, specifically. And so
Well,
I would love to hear your thoughts on, are we
I
actually
would,
as humans able to multitask?
I would love to be able to carve out a little space for the men of the world and say, please don't bother us with multitasking. That's just not true. I guess there's almost two parts to your question, which is, hey, are men different than women and their brains? And then, hey, can any of us multitask? And I'll take both of them if you don't mind.
Please.
There's so much out there about the brains of men and women, and they're this way and that way. And in my view, almost none of it is true in any particular reliable way.
Mhm.
And what I mean by that is, take a look at like height distributions, right? If you were to plot all of the height distributions of men and women, you would see that men are on the average taller. All right. But if you also looked, you would see, well, okay, but 30% of women are probably still taller than half of men, as the case may be, right? I mean,
Right.
I'm shorter than WNBA players, right?
Right.
So there's overlap. Now, so fine, you can see there's a difference on the average, but there's some overlap. So when you look at, in my view, when you look at most of these studies of brain function, right? Who's better at recognizing emotions? Who's better at rotating space, shapes in space? You see those same two distributions. You can find these differences on the average, but they are minute compared to the scale of human performance. So you might see that there's a difference between men and women on, let's say, spatial rotation, which is this odd task that psychologists are very fascinated with. But then you'd look and you'd say, fine, men are maybe slightly better on the average than women, but nonetheless, 48% of women are still better than the average man. It's a very small difference. And then you look one step further and you're like, hey, most of these things are result of lifetime experience. Men are almost certainly slightly better than the average woman at spatial rotation because we still have a society which pushes boys into playing ball sports and they have a lot of chance to do that. And we have a society that pushes young girls into, doing various other things. I don't have any doubt as a neuroscientist that if we, just exposed our kids to a more equal set of opportunities of things, that we'd find that their brains developed in very similar ways. So I really don't buy most of the differences. But I don't think anyone can multitask, actually. I mean, let me put it this way. I don't think anyone can multitask efficiently,
Well,
right?
yeah.
And we're all in situations where we have to multitask, whether we like it or not. And again, I look at societal roles for gender. I think women are commonly asked to multitask because we still live in a society where women are commonly asked to take the lead as a family manager role or in taking care of kids. Hey, if you're going to do that, you're going to be multitasking, whether you like it or not. It's not that women are better at it. It's
We just
that
have to.
well, until they get their husbands to step up to the plate. So I apologize if I'm throwing your husband under the bus here. And I get it. He's right. He doesn't want to multitask, but you shouldn't either. Because none of us are good at it. So you might need to do a little more and just be comfortable with the idea that, hey, I'm not going to be great at doing this, and we all just might need a little bit less stress and pressure in our lives as best.
I love it.
Sorry, men of the world. I wish I could defend you a bit better here, but
Well, luckily, this is the Fit Women's podcast, so I don't think a lot of men are going to be listening to get
all right.
offended.
Okay, all you fit women out there doing 32 pull-ups in the morning, go out and make sure the men in your lives bear their share burden. Nobody
That's
likes to
right.
multitask, and you shouldn't have to be the ones who necessarily have to put up with it. So,
Exactly. Well, I've got one more question for you because I know that we're coming up on time. I know this could be a very loaded question, so you can cut it however you would like. But talking about stroke, actually, one of my best friends, her husband actually had a stroke on Sunday night.
oh my goodness, I'm
Yes,
sorry
so
to hear it.
thank you. It's very, very fresh in our minds, obviously. And I know a lot of people have experienced some kind of cognitive issue, whether it's stroke or Parkinson's or Alzheimer's. So if you are dealing with such an issue, what are some things like you said, there's plasticity. What are some things that maybe he could be doing once he's getting discharged today? Monday was very bleak. So those of you guys that have followed me on social media, Monday looked terrible, but he did a 180 and now he gets to come home today. So fantastic.
Fantastic.
But what are the things that people should prioritize to not only stay healthy, but even become healthier with their brain?
Well, for him and anyone who's recovering from a stroke, what I would say is, hey, recovery is a very active process.
Mhm.
And in the old days, they might have told you, hey, go home, you'll get better as you're going to get better. No one should be doing that. No one should be saying that. There are still some doctors out there who have that viewpoint, but we just have to move past that.
Mhm.
So I would look for him to get in touch with a great rehabilitation team. And usually we divide rehabilitation depending on his specific needs into physical therapy, if he has movement needs,
Mhm.
occupational therapy, trying to get back to life, speech and language therapy, if he's having problems with speech or language, and cognitive rehabilitation therapy, if he's involved in that. But it's an active process and it is a journey, right? It's like becoming physically fit, again, depending on his particular illness, his ailments. But that being said, all of those things are plastic. All those things can be made better. Part of the trick to it is to really focus on working on the things that are hard for you. I think one of the enormous breakthroughs that came in stroke rehabilitation, really probably 20, 30 years ago now, is the idea of constraint-induced training. And so many people who have stroke, for example, will have a movement deficit on one arm because
Mhm.
that the opposite part of the brain's been damaged. And the natural thing to do is, well, hey, my left arm doesn't work so good. I'll just do everything with my right arm. Well, as you know, as a fitness person, your left arm's not going to get any better if you do
Right.
that. Often what stroke rehab people do is they'll actually constrain the good arm for a period of time. So you just have to eat with your messed up left arm. But that's what the brain wants, right? It wants to retrain those abilities. It has to take that damaged area of the brain and it has to take the areas around it and it has to retrain them to take over the function that the damaged brain did. So it's hard work. I'm not going to make light of it, but it's exactly the kind of hard work that you know from your fitness, right? Your hard work will pay off as you do it over time. So it is an active process, and if for any reason a person is talking to a doctor who's like, "Well, you'll get better as you get better," or "Hey, this is as good as it's going to get," you find someone who's going to put you on a path to active recovery in that sense.
Mhm.
And as far as reducing your risk, anyone, and I would certainly again recommend as well, being physically active and improving your heart health reduces your risk of stroke. Improving your nutrition and eating a heart healthier diet reduces your risk of stroke. Those are all good things to do. I sometimes hesitate to say them because I imagine your friend's husband did many of those things. And I never want people to feel a sense of personal blame, like, oh, I had a stroke. I guess I really should have gone to the gym one extra day. Like this is not a healthy way to think about it, right? Very healthy people can have strokes.
Right.
But nonetheless, one more reason to think about nutritional health, physical health, and then cognitive health as well.
Mhm.
And but there are wonderful rehab people out there who can really get them on that journey. And it's an incredibly scary time. I know a number of people who've gone through it, but hey, great change is possible with the right help and the right work. So I wish him luck on that journey,
Thank you.
and his spouse too, because she will be
Yes.
helping him along every step of the way, I'm sure.
She's one of my workout
Yeah,
partners, and she's like, I got to start working out because this is going to be a fitness journey for me, trying to get him back as well with the work that she has to help with him. It's
you
definitely
will
going to be a
be.
team project, but it's all on the up and
Yep,
up.
you will be a refuge and help for her.
Yeah.
Yep,
Well,
yep.
thank you
So,
so much for hanging out with me today. That was very, very educational. And I know that everyone listening will be like, oh my gosh, where can I get some brain exercises? So you guys definitely go check out Brain HQ. But is there any place else that you recommend going for good information? Do you have social media that people can follow you on? Kind of put your
yeah.
calling
So
out
first of
there.
all, first of all, anyone who wants to give these brain training exercises a try, or if you know someone in your life who'd like to give them a try, just go to www.brainhq.com. You can actually register for free, try out one exercise per day, see if it's for you, and then take it from there. And hey, speaking of your friends, we've just introduced this very fun new feature where you can have a friend in Brain HQ, kind of like a workout buddy. And so, like for example, HQ, it sends a little notification to my mom and it says, hey, doesn't tell her what I did or how well I did, but she knows I trained. And then when she trains, it sends a little message back to me. Hey, your mom someone you go to the gym with. It helps. And then we have actually a tremendous amount of brain health information at Brain HQ. We run a brain health blog, which has got information about fitness and sleep and diet and all the kinds of things we've been talking about. And people can find us on Facebook, where we put a lot of that information out as well at Brain HQ. So it's a very fun
Awesome.
topic, and we're learning new stuff every day. It's been a very fun time to be a researcher in this field.
I bet this is a I'm always science is just amazing to me and how you feel like we learn new stuff all the time. Every time you think like how much more can we learn, something else comes out. I know that there was even I spoke with somebody last year, I think, where we had just discovered a completely new part of the brain that we had not known about. And I'm like, how is this possible with the imaging technology that we have today? It just my brain just goes, what? I'm in awe.
As they say, we look back and realize how much we've learned, and then we look ahead to the mountaintop and we realize how far we have to go. So,
Exactly,
but it's a fun way to
exactly.
live.
What'd you think? Dr. Mahncke was so nice, so easy to talk to, and I hope that over the course of the podcast, you were able to find some nuggets that you can now implement into your own life or that you can share with other people in your life. If that's the case, do me a favor, share this podcast or this YouTube video with the people that are around you. Chances are you enjoy this, then your friends and family will as well. And of course, it really does mean a lot to me if you guys could interact. So whether that is subscribing to the podcast or to the YouTube channel, sharing it, leaving a review, or if you're watching this on YouTube, leave me a comment down below. If you have questions or topics that you would like covered in the next show, let me know. And then, of course, remember Ignite 30 starts on November 4th. It's not too late to join in if you're a woman and you're looking to be pushed and challenged in a new way, but with a training plan that is actually doable and not overwhelming, because I know this time of the year, things can get a little bit messy, then the Ignite 30 is going to be what you want in your life. So go check it out, sign up, and if you have any questions about that, I'm always an open book. You can either respond by leaving a comment if you're watching on YouTube, or shoot me an email, kindle@fitwomensweekly.com, and I'll be happy to help you decide if Ignite is right for you, or maybe it's not. I will always be honest with you guys. All right, thanks so much for hanging out with me. Talk to you later. Oh, and of course, go check out Dr. Mahncke. Very, very kind man. I loved that episode.